Where's the truth in these rock and roll stories? You asked three different people that were in a band in 1977, for instance, just as an example, and you may get three different answers. Then there's the memory thing. Not everyone can remember. I can't remember barely anything I did in 77, unless I'm talking about music. And I'm one of those lucky guys that still has his journal from 1977. So I'd have to look on it and to see what I did on what particular day. And it might still not ring a bell. Why did Randy Meisner leave Poco? He gave me a reason back in, I forget when I did an interview with him. Then I interviewed Jim Messina, who was in the band at the time. Then I interviewed Richie Furay twice, and we talked about Randy Meisner. And this was all before Randy died. Why am I going back to these interviews? Well, first of all, I just found some clips that I had. This is an old interview that I didn't do, that my friend Steve Burgess did. Steve gave me all his interviews. An interview with Paul Cotton, who we lost in 2021, and who replaced Jim Messina, by the way, in Poco, and Rusty Young. They were together in this. They're doing an interview, and it's from, where was it? March of 1985. Now, we're going to present that interview to you in the next month or something. And I have no idea what's on this interview. I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm pretty sure they're in the studio, so it's going to be good quality. So we lost both those guys. And Rusty was an original member. So it got me thinking about Poco, and so we're going to present to you, and it's an interesting take, because you get Randy telling us why he left Poco. You know, and went on to join the Eagles, so it wasn't a bad thing. And he left the Eagles after the Hotel California tour. And then we'll hear Jim Messina and Richie Furay. And then you're going to hear why each of the latter two, Richie Furay and Jim Messina, why they left Poco. All that and a lot more for you on Rock History Music.
I did that first album with them,
right.
Picking Up the Pieces. And then there was a thing where Richie Furay, we made the album. And then I called in and, I said, well, I want to come down and listen to the mixes. And Richie, for some reason, they thought that him and Jimmy Messina should just do it alone. And I said, well, if that's the way it's going to be, I said, I don't feel like a member of the band. Richie said, okay, so you can quit, kind of thing. So then I left. It was just simple as that.
I was in the studio that day, the evening when it happened, and what I had asked the guys to do is please don't bring friends around in here while I'm trying to mix, because it's distracting. And it was a very small studio. We were at CBS. So, and I think Richie and I were there that evening, and it was just the two of us. Then somebody came up to the door. I don't know who it was. I'm focused on mixing and working. And apparently that incident happened between Richie and Randy. And why Richie wouldn't let him in, I have no idea. Why not? Yeah. Unless he had a whole gang of people with him, which I don't think he did, not from my recollection. But again, bad choices. That was not in today's terms an appropriate thing to do.
Here's the deal. When you make records, it's a very it can be a tedious situation. And just like in cooking, too many chefs. And so now I'm going to say that this was more on Jimmy's part than mine, because Jimmy was producing the record. But when it came time to mix the record down, Randy was asked probably not to come into the studio until we got some kind of mix done. Now I'm going to be there because it's my band, along with Jimmy. And so, the two of us are sitting there and we're trying to balance things out. And Rusty didn't come in, George didn't come in, and Randy didn't come in. And it really bothered Randy that, he was not able to come in. Now, it wasn't that, okay, we've got it done. Thanks a lot. You guys did it. No, it's come in now and listen to it. And what do you hear? But we never got to that stage with him. It's like, and I'm used to that even today. Val's mixing the record in LA today, and I'm not there I don't want to be there when he mixes it. When I mixed my last 5 or 6 records, with Jim Mason and with John Macy, and with, I wasn't there, saying, here, you got to give a little more 3 dB of that stuff. It's all in my ear, what I hear. And so I let them get the balance and get it put in position. I said, no, man, we got to have, this needs to be brought up. Now, as far as what, the sonic part of it is, I don't get it anymore. It's like, doesn't mean anything. But Randy wanted to be there and to be a part of the hands-on, and I don't think Jimmy wanted that to happen.
Raymond Kelsey asks, he says, I've never heard the reason why you left Poco.
Well, the reason that I left was because I felt if Good Feeling to Know did not make the dent, or grab on, put a footprint down, it wasn't ever going to happen. And at that time, like I say, John, I was consumed with, man, I seen Stephen and Neil go off to success, Jimmy went off to success, Randy went off to success, and I'm thinking to myself, what? Now, what about me? I'm just as talented as these guys. That was in the back of my mind. I mean, those are some real talented guys. So for me to even compare myself to those talented guys, that's another story.
Yeah, but you were still in the room. You were in that room. I tell this to a lot of musicians, and I'm going, you got in that room because you deserve to be in that room. I mean, sometimes there's exceptions to that, right? But you were in that room. You were in that band. Yeah. So we'll hear none of that, damn it.
Yeah, Poco wasn't going to make it. I wanted a hit. I wanted to be a big star. I wanted my name at the, my name at Carnegie Hall or the Hollywood Bowl or whatever, And, if Good Feeling to Know didn't grab somebody, and it didn't become a national hit, it wouldn't happen. So I left for that reason.
I don't know if you ever met Caleb Quay. He had a similar journey to you. He was in rock and roll, and then he became a pastor. He's Elton John's guitarist for the first, right up till Mad Men Across the Water, came back for Rock of the Westies. They're probably back there. Rock of the Westies and Blue Moves. But I say that because Caleb left Hall & Oates after playing with Elton John. He was there, and he had a moment, he said. He said, God spoke to him, and everyone thought he was crazy. And then Chester Thompson, who plays with Genesis, he met with him, and he said, Chester, why do you seem so happy? Why are you so plugged in? And he says, basically helped him on that road, of becoming, and now he's a pastor, and he spends as much time doing this as he does doing this, like the music. What was it for you? What caused you to change your path?
Well, my life was basically turned upside down. We were recording the first Souther Hillman Furay record, and the whole story with Al Perkins, who led me to the Lord, is quite an interesting story in itself, because Chris Hillman had played with him, and when Chris suggested that Al be a part of the band, I said, no way. There's no way this guy with this little Jesus sticker on his guitar, that says Jesus is Lord, is going to be in our band, that's going to stop us from, the success that I want. I'd watch Stephen and Neil and Jimmy and other guys just in my bands, or who I played with go off to huge success. And I was driven at this time, and I didn't want anything that I thought was going to stop me. And I thought, you put some kind of religious thing in here, and that's going to be the end of it right there. But Chris won out. And Al could have been anything. He could have been a womanizer. He could have been a drug addict. He could have been an alcoholic. He could have been anything, but he was a Christian. And that's why I didn't want him in the band. And you know what? When Al got in the band, I wasn't really probably a very nice guy to him. I didn't want Al in a band. I was afraid he was going to really stop us from the success and everything that was really on my mind at the time. And, and I did. I kind of shied away from him, stayed away from him, but somehow or another things just worked out, and Al led me to the Lord. Now, my wife had come to the Lord about maybe 6 months before that, and little did I know that at this time, Souther Hillman Furay was in Aspen. We live in Boulder, and we were in Aspen rehearsing for our first national tour. And Nancy wouldn't go with me. She didn't want to go over there. And I thought, well, it's a 2-week vacation in Aspen. Come on, I mean, you're just going to, only time we're going to be doing something is playing at night and maybe rehearsing a few times during the day. And she didn't want to come. And when I called her, because I knew that she had accepted the Lord, when I called her from Aspen, almost on the very last day, it was a couple days before, and told her, I became a Christian. I prayed with Al the other night and accepted the Lord. And there was dead silence on the other end of the phone. And she, in her mind at this time, was out of the marriage. I mean, that's what was going on at the time, that I had no idea what was going on. And she was out of the marriage. And when I told her that, she knew, that the scripture kind of like, didn't say you got to stay together, but you know what? Divorce isn't really one of the primary things in your faith life. And she was so disappointed when she came over to get me, John. It was one of the, when I think back on some of this stuff, it really, I'm really thankful that things worked out the way they did, because it was one of the hardest times that it was dead silence on the phone. When I got back she came over to pick me up. I got on the phone, called Al Perkins, and I could barely talk to him. I was crying so hard. And he said, "Come on out to LA, and we'll just take things, a day at a time, and we'll see what happens." And obviously as things worked out, Nancy and I have been married for 53 years now, so things worked out pretty good. But at the time, it was we were married for 7 years when this happened, and it was seven. We married for 7 years, separated for 7 months. And it was a tough call, but here's what you say. What was it? Well, what it was that Nancy and I both lost our dads. I was 13 years old and she was 7 years old, and she was seeing me be away so much, traveling on the road all the time. And I thought I'm doing a good job, man. I've provided a nice house. We've got a roof over our head, nice cars. We were doing fine, but and she didn't want to bring up the family, that we had started. We had one daughter at the time, and she was pregnant with our second daughter. She didn't want to bring the family up without without their dad being around, without their father being around. And so she was, her way of rectifying that was, let's end the marriage, and we'll go off in another direction. But the Lord intervened, and after 7 months, we got back together, and here we are, man. Still going hand in hand. Still going hand in hand.
That blows my mind. So I did a whole series on people of faith, right? I haven't put it out yet, but then I found out I was talking to you.
Al took me down to a place called Calvary Chapel. Right. In Costa Mesa, California. Pastor Chuck Smith started it in the early 70s. And it was there that I met a lot of my friends and a lot of people that encouraged me. And I had no idea that I was going to pastor for 35 years. I had no idea. If somebody would have even told me at some point in my life, you're going to become a believer and you're going to become a pastor, I would have told him, you are nuts, and because I didn't even know the ramifications of what it meant to be saved, to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. I had no idea. I thought, and I won't go so far as to say as many today were born in America, you're a Christian automatically. That's like a check mark. No, that's not the way it goes, man. There's got to be a crisis in your life, and there was definitely in my life, when the carpet was ripped out from under me. I remember walking on a beach in St. Petersburg, Florida, when all this was going down, and the Lord said, you made a commitment to me. Now it's time we talk about it. And that's when everything just went topsy-turvy, upside down. And it took 7 months, for us to get back together. But thankfully, with Al and some of the people out in California, friends of mine, that are pastors, who helped me along the way. And there we go.
Leaving projects is, again, in 35 years of talking to people, there's I hear a lot of regrets. And what, hard times makes good people. Most people are satisfied with their choices, but there's always a few times where we go, leaving Poco. Tell me about that.
Well, I got to the point where I had produced 2 albums. And for me, in retrospect, what I realized I was feeling, didn't know it at the time, I just felt it. But Richie was getting very frustrated personally with the fact he wasn't as successful as Stephen or as successful as Neil. There was a lot of anxiety, a lot of nail biting, and no matter what I didn't seem to be enough to help him. And you have to realize I came from being his producer. Yeah. I was the one that wrote his charts, made sure he had his musicians. Neil was always okay. And Stephen was fine. He'd get his own musicians, and he'd call me up and say, okay, I want to do this. And I'd say, fine. I'd book the time, do it, get it recorded. He'd go off and start doing his overdose. But Richie was quite different. Richie didn't read music. He played acoustic guitar. Didn't know a lot of musicians. I'm the producer. So I hired them, filled out the contracts, wrote the charts, got them in. So now we're in Poco. And I think Richie's feeling like, well, this is my band, right? And that never really bothered me in terms of whether it was his band. I mean, it was his music we were doing, so from that standpoint. But it never really was his band. We all owned it. But he was getting to the point where he was getting a little angry. And we had an incident that happened in the studio where he couldn't hit a note and was very frustrated, very frustrated. In those days, you know, you see those little machines you got in the back. Well, we had this video machine they had turned into, I think it was a 16-track machine, and it had a button about the size that you see in a industrial area where if somebody gets acid in their face, you press this button and the water shoots. That's the size of the record button on the machine. And it was totally union. So I was working in situations where the studio, very large room and console, and in another room was the recordist who pressed the record button. And now I've got a guy out here trying to sing one note, one high note, and I have to grab that note. And I was not allowed to touch the board even though I was an IEBW union guy, because they had these collective co-bargaining agreements that said an artist couldn't touch the board. Even though I was a union guy and it was my union, they wouldn't let me touch the board. So ordinarily I would have gone, boom, we got the note. But here I am having to translate, you know, now for 13 or 14 times. And Richie thought he'd gotten the note. And the only way I could tell whether he'd have the note, I'd have to listen on input. I'd have to listen to what was going into the tape machine, but there was a gap of that much.
Yeah.
And that gap is a number of milliseconds. So I had to learn how to cue the guy in advance so that when he hit it, he was ahead of the cue. So I'd gotten every note before that, but he thought he got the note. And I said, well, you know what? I think you may have got the note, but I don't think we got it. He said, what are you talking about? I said, well, so he came in and he pushes me out of the way. And he said, I guess I'm going to have to do things myself to get it right. It was at that moment I thought, I think you are. You know, maybe it's that time that you start doing things yourself. So I decided in my mind that I needed to leave. And I still had an album to do. We had a live album to do. And so I let the guys know that I was going to be leaving, and had a conversation with Clive Davis on a train to Philadelphia. And I explained to him I needed to leave. But mainly I was just tired of being on the road, you know. And I had just gotten married, and production was always something that I've done, having been an engineer and produced records even before Springfield. It was time for me to be home, be in LA, and do what I felt I can do best. So I made arrangements that I asked if I complete this album, get somebody to replace me in Poco, could I get the opportunity of perhaps getting an independent production deal with CBS? And Clive said, you know, get this done, get the album done, make your transition happy, make sure that you don't hurt anybody, and we'll work together, and I'll get you what you need. So I finished that record, which was delivering, and Paul Cotton, they chose to replace me. So Paul and I shared a room, and I taught him his parts that I played so that he'd be comfortable.
What was that? What was that like? Was that cool? Was that cool with you? Are you one of those guys where you're going, well, it's the next step, I want to leave anyway? Was that okay?
It was okay because I wanted to leave, and again, my purpose was to leave this band in good shape, not sabotage it. What would that do for me? You know, even if I was successful and didn't know that would be happening afterwards, what am I gaining from that? Those guys are a bunch of putzes. You know, I'm glad that they failed. No, that's not me. You know, being a producer, it's not about. I can't have that kind of ego. It has to be one for all and all for one if it's going to work. It has to be the Three Musketeers, or it doesn't work. So I was glad they found somebody to replace me, and I was more glad that he was a nice person because I had to share a room with him, right? But we became good friends, and I taught him his parts, and we made the transition. I think it was November the 31st, 1970.
How do you remember this? Oh my God, you have an amazing brain.
I don't know. I just do, you know. But he made the transition, and subsequent to which Clive Davis honored his promise, and he negotiated a deal with my attorney, and I started working for CBS as an independent producer. And so it all worked out. You know, if you're not getting along with people, if I'm not getting along with people, I'd rather say, hey, look, let's make some different choices. We have different personalities here. We're all trying to do the best we can for ourselves.
Let me ask, do you remember the song that you were trying to get that note on? Did
No.
it ever? Let's leave that alone.
I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of times where I had made punches for people.
Yeah.
But as I said, Richie was getting to the point where he personally was getting very, very frustrated and was anxious about wanting the success. And I think it's not something he did on purpose, but it was becoming apparent that it was getting harder and harder to work with him. And what I didn't want to do is what happens sometimes. You turn around, take your fist, and punch somebody in the eye. And what is that going to do?
Yeah, yeah.
That's going to just ruin your reputation.
Very interesting, chaps. I love talking to Richie Furay. Jim Messina was a pleasure. I think he was in his kitchen when I interviewed him. And of course, the Randy Meisner thing. And Randy was such a beautiful man to interview. I've said this many times on the channel, but in the middle of the interview, Randy stopped the interview for a second because I think he lived in the hills of Los Angeles. And anyway, he stopped the interview and he said, "Oh, look, there's some deer in my backyard." And we talk about, and I've said this again, he would eat oranges or eat tomatoes like he would eat apples. And I did the same thing back then. So it was a pleasure. We're going to keep recycling a few of these things that I know a lot of our new listeners haven't really watched. But anyway, thanks for watching. Appreciate that. Make sure you comment on our video, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell notification so you don't miss anything. But, share them, like them, share them on social media. We'd appreciate that. I'm John Bowden. This is Rock History Music. Take care.